Hi, dissertation students. Welcome to your video lecture on the doctoral dissertation culture. I'm going to go through some things that you need to know along the way. This is for basically understanding the culture that cultural change that will happen when you go from being a student to being ABD, all but dissertation. Okay, so one of the things that you're going to learn is the drama of picking a topic, trying to figure out what is your dissertation going to be about. You can see here in this comic illustration that it often is a flash of brilliance, an epiphany that you have, and it feels like that you have discovered the Holy Grail. And then you go to your dissertation chair and you say, look, here's my amazing topic. And the dissertation chair says, no, it's boring, doesn't work, it's too small, blah, blah, blah. And you have to go back to the drawing boards. This is a thing. They made a comic about it. It's the nature of the beast. You will have many times where you get excited about things, and that excitement has to be modulated by your chair in order for your own good. Students will often go too big, and they'll pick a topic that's just too broad. Or they'll look around their work and they'll say, oh, I want to study Marge over there because Marge, she's interesting, I'm going to study her. So that's obviously too small. So we've got to find the right mix in between. So there's going to be a lot of trial and error, a lot of back and forths, and this is just normal. It's part of the culture, and that's what we're learning about today, the culture of the dissertation. So one of the things you're doing when you're creating a prospectus tool or your proposal is you're talking about your plan. And that's what we are going over in the residency ultimately, is how you'll be planning this study. And so part of the culture of the doctoral dissertation is really not always having a clear idea of where you want to go, and instead having to try to figure out where you want to go with the help of your chair and committee. So, for example, what do you intend to study? How do you intend to study it? What is the topic that you're going to study? Why is it significant? When will you complete the work? What's your timeline look like? Where will you be conducting the research? Who's your population? Who's your sample? These are all things that you can consider now, even in the residency, before you start the dissertation. You should be starting to think about these ideas. This is a big project. It's not a small paper. It's not something that you can write over the course of a quarter or even a month, or even a quarter. You're going to have to be thinking about this ongoing for a great deal of time while you're in the program. When you get to the dissertation, when you get to start writing all this up, and you get practice with it in 623 and 625, where you're practicing writing a literature review, you get some of the practice. Writing is a creative endeavor, even if it's academic writing. And so there's going to be times where you're going to be stuck. You're going to get writer's block. There's going to be times when you don't know where to go next, where you're confused or you're unsure, and suddenly you realize you went down the wrong path. I can't tell you during the time of my dissertation, when I was writing my literature review, how many times I wrote myself into a corner or wrote myself into a hole, and I didn't know where to go next. And I had to reorganize the literature review to set things in the right place. Sometimes when you're writing in a linear way, when you're writing like from A to B, you realize that B actually should have gone before A. And so you have to make those changes. And in the old days, when you had to do it by typewriter, people would cut and paste things into new documents in order to have that. So clearly, we're in a much better place now with computers. But one of the things that you can do to help you keep from having writer's block is to establish a writing schedule. pick times when you're going to be writing on a regular basis, because your brain will adapt to that schedule, and then it will start automatically pre-preparing you to write by the time you sit down to actually do the writing. A schedule really can help your body and mind get into the zone much more quickly. Sometimes you're going to need to free write. You're going to need to just write something. Maybe writing in a journal or writing in some other way will get the writing bug warmed up inside of you so you can do it. Make sure also to keep a small notebook with you to write down your thoughts. This is called memoing in grounded theory, but the idea behind it is when you're in the moment writing in your literature review or writing up your dissertation findings, you don't have time to chase down a random thought that comes into your mind, because it can knock you out. I remember during times when I was working on my dissertation that I would be completely thrown off, because I would have this idea, so I'd go to look for some research, I'd find that research, then I would fall down a rabbit hole doing research all day, only to find out that it's really not going to apply to my topic. It wasted an entire day because I didn't just write down the thought to investigate later. Save parts of your writing into a recording device. You can record your voice, then listen back to it and see if it makes sense. You can also, so then other ways that you can basically keep track of where you're going and keep your ideas is to write things down on index cards, or have two computers and look at different things at the same time, or look at different documents up in front of you. If you have dual screens, it's really good that you can kind of compare. And then you can always take what you've done that you know is good and then kind of block that off and then kind of build around it. It's kind of like building a house. So here's some more cultural advice to give. This is true for the entire dissertation process, not just the proposal. But even the prospectus, you're going to have to negotiate. You're going to have to revise. And I can't say it enough that you're going to have to revise. As a matter of fact, I might say you're going to have to revise many times, because revision is going to be your life during your dissertation. You may think your work is brilliant, but there is a committee of a chair and two committee members. There's a dissertation director, and ultimately the dean are all going to give their opinion and their expertise to your work. So they're going to have ideas, they're going to have things that they want, they're going to have their pet peeves, and you need to respond to that. That is part of your learning cycle. That's part of your job when you're doing your dissertation. You're no longer a student. You're no longer listening to a professor. You are becoming the professor, and as such, you are going to have to listen to these people who have been through it before, these people who have done this project before. Your prospectus is about alignment. The proposal is really an introduction to the project that you're doing. And it's important to note that your proposal isn't going to be set in stone. The only thing that will be set in stone is once you get IRB approval, you need to follow what you told IRB you were going to do. Pretty much that means the methodology section is where you eventually are set in stone, but you may have to make changes to your proposal when you finished it and it's already approved. Changes may still have to happen. Again, the dissertation isn't done until the dean signs off on it. You make it into a PDF and you submit it to ProQuest. Then it's done. Another good tip is to form a writing group with some of your colleagues and your peers. This is an online program, so a sense of isolation that we all feel during a dissertation can even be worse, because you may not have had the chance to make friends. But ultimately, the people that you're going to be with here in residency, connect with them, connect with people doing the same kind of topics that you're doing, and form groups, either on Facebook. We have an ABD group on Facebook, or you can do your own thing, but just have people that you can lean on for support during this process. Here's a couple more funny comics. Creating a good title for your dissertation or your thesis. Typically, a thesis is a master's project. So You do a thesis at the end of your master's degree. You do a dissertation at the end of your doctoral degree. But some people will call it a doctoral thesis, so that's where those words come from. There's just a little funny thing about how we create titles. You'll find that you're going to be very tempted to make your dissertation title super duper long. And it's just the nature of the world. Just keep in mind that has to go on the side of a binding if you were to get your dissertation bound. So you do want to make sure that you do use a little bit of conciseness in your title creation. Here's another comic that I thought was funny, talking about a thesis outline. Now, we do a 5-chapter dissertation, which is for a dissertation is normal. But the idea here is that you're going to have to write a chapter 1, and the lit review is chapter 2, and that the methodology is chapter 3. So where people often go crazy is thinking about, well, what are the findings, and what's the discussion? How does that look? That these other chapters are so laid out that chapters 4 and 5 can seem like somewhat of a mystery. So when you're considering your timeline and you're thinking about how you're going to spend this time in doing your dissertation, think about the fact that there's going to be some gray areas. There's going to be some times when you're not really sure what's happening. Did I mention earlier about revision? Because revision is important, and you're going to be revising and revising and revising and revising. We're saying this now because oftentimes people forget by the time they get to the dissertation process, and they're surprised when people have opinions. It's important to note that even if Mary D., the dissertation director, was your professor in 623, and she said your methodology was amazing, and you did your literature review in 625, and she gave you an A on that literature review, those are class assignments, and they're graded like a class assignment. It does not mean that the same Mary D. may not turn around later and say, no, it's not right, you need to redo it, or no, you need to change this, or you need to change that. Your chair may not like what you did in your classes. You're no longer a student when you start the dissertation. You're no longer in a class. This is a project. This is a growth period. This is something you're learning. So realize that you may have to make revisions. You may have to make changes. One of the things that often gets frustrating for students is your chair may say, you have to change this whole section. I don't like it. Cut it. Remove it. We don't need to talk about this. Then a month or two later, you may have the chair say, oh, you know what would be really good? A section about this. And you're like, well, I had that and you told me to remove it. You can save that sentence and you can just say, yeah, I can get that and do it, because you know what? The chair is going to change their mind. It's the nature of the process. When you rewrite something, like you could rewrite one sentence and suddenly everything is different. Suddenly everything has changed. One sentence can change the tone of the entire thing. Just words. Words are powerful. The difference between what and how, or what and why, can cause huge debates. Just know that your chair is never going to be capricious or arbitrary. They know how a dissertation should look. They know how a literature review should be written, and they're going to give you the best advice they can. But they're human, and they may realize later that they made a mistake, and they may want you to add it back. Your job is to do that. The revision process is a normal part of this whole dissertation world, and everybody went through it, and everybody did it. Keep all your drafts and keep your drafts organized. This is the other thing. And have a backup drive and have them backed up to the backup drive. And then have a backup drive, a third backup drive, and have them organized to that backup drive. Use dates to keep things organized, because the dates will be important. You may remember that 6 months ago you had a section, or you had a way of saying something that you need to return to your current document. You can go back and look at the title with the date in it from 6 months ago, and then you can pull what you need out of that draft. Multiple drafts are important. If you are revising a document, revise it in a new and save it with a new name. Always revise and save with new names, so you have iterations of the document that you did and you don't lose anything. Very, very, very important in the world of revision. So thinking of your timeline, a lot of people come into the dissertation and think, I'll have this done in a couple months. I'll just breeze through this. I hear all the time, oh, I already had a prospectus, I already had a proposal, I've already done all this work. This should go really fast for me. It should just blaze right through. Well, that's not always going to be the case. There's a lot of different things that have to be decided. There's a lot of different things that will happen over the course of your dissertation process. Your life is going to happen. And guess what? You can't pause the dissertation for your life. You can't say, oh, I'm sick this week, so I'm stopping my dissertation. You're just making the dissertation take longer. And that's just the way of the world. Your chair may go on vacation, and you may want to submit your draft to the chair. Well, your chair's on vacation. Those kind of things happen. It's good to try to plan with your chair when you're going to be turning in drafts, because then your chair can actually do something about that and maybe make sure that they let you know that they're going to be gone during that time so you can prepare. Your relationship with your chair is the most important thing. You've got to have a good relationship and good communication with your chair. That is number one when it comes to this process. So just make sure that you build that relationship with your chair. Make sure that you are talking to them and you know their plans, they know your plans. And it's also reversed as true. If you're going to go on vacation and not work on your dissertation and your chair is expecting a draft, make sure you tell them, I'm going on my vacation. You won't get a draft for the next 2 weeks. Also remember, when you're looking at the dissertation guide and it says the prospectus is done in 694A and the proposal is done in 694B, those are just guidelines. They are not set in stone. So you need to understand that you're not going to be judged in this traditional way you're judged in a class. You're going to have to do your own timeline, do your own thing. It's important to not be overly ambitious, because whether or not you pass your dissertation class space, I'm going to call it class space, because it really is just a space holder. It's the way we pay the chairs. But if you're not going to pass a section, if you are don't make your goal, the goal that you set with your chair at the beginning of the quarter. So make sure you're realistic about your goals when you set them. It's much better to surpass your goal than it is to not make your goal. So make goals that are obtainable. Even if you're going to exceed them, make sure you have obtainable goals. You're also the guide in your own study. Keep that in mind. You need to be realistic about timelines. You need to be realistic about when are you going to get a document back? How many times is it going to have to be looked at? If you're a bad writer, and I'm not saying that you're ultimately a bad writer, but for example, I am a horrible speller. I know I make grammatical mistakes constantly. I either use too many commas or I don't use enough commas. But either way, I make mistakes. So when you make mistakes, when mistakes happen, you need to clean those up. And if you can't clean those up, you need to realize that you're going to go through a lot of revision. You're going to have to send your work to an editor. You're going to have to revise. You're going to have to resubmit. It's going to take longer. You need to know that about yourself if that's the way you are. If you're a precise writer and you usually don't have a lot of revisions from your chair and committee, then it's probably going to be faster for you. You need to factor that into the case. Think about vacations. Think about travel. Think about family events. All of these need to be put into play when you're planning out your timeline. And just remember that you're going to have to revise. So plan several revision cycles in. And revision cycles include having to keep in mind that your chairs work full-time jobs. They are not full-time chairs. Therefore, they may be busy and they may take longer to get something back. We give them a set amount of time at CityU that we think is a fair amount of time for them to look at something that you've sent them. They should stay within those timelines. Sometimes they might not, and hopefully they'll communicate that with you. If it becomes a problem, you should always let your program director know. But in the end, you need to just remember, think the maximum time when you're thinking of the cycles of revision. And there's one thing that you need to know. Don't argue, don't whine, don't complain. It's not going to help. You can complain till the day is long. You can whine about how many times you've had to take out something and put it back in again. You could complain all day long. Do it to the mirror. Do it to your best friend. Do not complain and whine and argue with your chair. Every time you argue with your chair, committee member, or dissertation director, an angel loses its mind and adds another month to your timeline. I am serious. The time you spend going back and forth trying to get your point across is all adding to the time it's going to take you to get done with your dissertation. If you have a point that you can back up with research or with facts that you've read in your methodology book, for example, or you know that there's this population variance that you are aware of because you see that population, you're a part of it, then that is something that you can discuss with your chair. It's a point that's based in research and facts. If it's not based in research and facts, then it's just your opinion. And you know what? You don't get to have opinions. Opinions are for people who have their doctoral degree. That's what you're working towards, and you will get that power someday, I promise. You must become a subject matter expert by doing this dissertation research. You're not already an expert. You may have read hundreds of articles, but you really don't know what's going on when it comes to your topic. You have to keep an open mind. You will become an expert in it once you have completed this study. You'll be immersed in the data. You'll have seen it. You'll have studied it. Then you will become the expert and can make decisions. Till then, nope. The other thing is, just as a side note, remember that if you study something very close to your heart, something that you're very passionate about, you're often going to get into arguments with people because you're passionate about it. It's your work, it's your life, it's things that you see. People often want to study something that's really emotionally laden for them. It's a very bad idea because it is going to make you more likely to argue, whine, and complain because you're so passionate about the topic. So keep that in mind as well. Let's see. When you are writing, when you are thinking about this topic, remember that you are becoming an academic. As such, you need to be confident in your writing. Just don't be arrogant and don't be apologetic. The tone you strike in your writing is someone who has done research in your literature. This is when you're writing your literature review, has done the research. When you're writing your findings, has done the actual study and has seen these things. You want to be confident. Just remember that it's arrogance and apologetic, making grand statements like it's always best if you do this. Those kind of things, those won't fly because that's not what it is about to be in an academic conversation. So one last couple of slides that were on here. Your dissertation is a project. It's a project over a course of a long period of time. Some people spend a year to a year and a half on their dissertation. Some people take 2 or 3 years on their dissertation. It's an ongoing project. You are not in a class. You don't have a teacher. There are no breaks. There are no summers off. There's no sick leave. When you start the dissertation cycle, you are in the dissertation cycle until you are finished. You must stay continuously enrolled when you're working on your dissertation. It is a requirement, it's a rule, it's what's done in every dissertation program I've ever been in or heard of or know anything about. You do have one firm deadline, and that's 7 years from the time you started the program to get your dissertation done. This is because after 7 years, the classes that you take are no longer considered valid, and you're losing your credential. You're losing your, what's the word I'm looking for? You're losing your mojo from what you've gained from your studies. You're dwelling on it. You're taking too long. It's kind of like one of those situations. We don't want you to be ABD for life. you're either gonna finish your dissertation or you're gonna need to move on. Um, that's really the bottom line here. That 7-year mark helps to keep people from just literally paying the university $1,000 a quarter for years while they're not making any progress. We don't want that to happen to you. Your chair is not your teacher, your chair is not your friend, your chair is not your coach. Your chair is a mentor who has completed the same type of project and has guided others to complete it. We hire chairs that have already graduated students, who have already got students through the process. They're guiding you. Now, sometimes they will, give you a little pep talk, and you will often possibly become friends with your chair. If anything, you'll be like your chair. That's the depth of the relationship. When it's over, it will have changed you. You'll be the way you think, the way you write, will be much more like the way your chair thinks and writes. It's just the nature of the process. Just remember that. But don't expect that your chair is going to call you up and say, rah, 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 hey, buddy, let's get this done. That's not the goal here. The goal here is for you to complete this project. Your dissertation needs to be error-free, stylistically correct, well-written, well-researched, and it must add to your field. Why? Why is that important? Why is a comma important here? Because these are the skills you need to be a doctor. Do you know how many times I leave commas out of something and students send me letters? It takes a little bit of your authority away, a little bit of your power away as a doctor when you're making simple mistakes, when you're making grammatical errors, when you're misspelling words. It takes away from your professionalism. You're supposed to be a professional academic when you have a doctoral degree. You are still human, but you know what? Your students aren't going to think you are. So keep that in mind. Finally, is it all bad? Well, the short answer is absolutely not all bad. You're putting a lot of creative and emotional energy into this project. It's going to be hard at times. You're going to cry, you're going to scream, you're going to get angry, you're going to be super happy, you're going to miss events, you're going to make sacrifices. Part of the dissertation. You are learning and you're growing. You're becoming a new thing. Look, growth is hard. Change is hard. But when you've finished, you'll be relieved. And then eventually you will celebrate what you've done. And for some of you, 5 years down the road, you're going to say, wow, dissertation was amazing. I want to help others do the dissertation. And then you'll become a chair. And then you will see what you chair saw when they first started with you. And it kind of completes the circle. It's kind of like a full circle thing. So that's all I have for you. Please write down any questions that you came up during this, and we'll talk about this. We'll talk about doctoral culture during the actual live residencies, and that'll give you some time to ask your questions. Look forward to seeing you all.